Yeah, you
Yeah,
mentioned that.
and I realized with horror that the day of hypertext is much closer than I thought, and I still have to write this wretched sort of thing. And given that last year there was a similar one that was done, but that was done by the person who actually wrote it. It's kind of no pressure at all, really.
Talking of deadlines and dates and things, first, just to state the thing, on Friday we sent what we all agreed to Lisa, the statement that should be in the beginning of Visual Meta. Today, Mark sent an email with all kinds of things about BibTech. So that's all done as far as we're concerned, which is exciting. But on the, hi, Raphael, good timing. So I was just going to say that on the 9th of December, which happens to be the anniversary of Doug's demo, Bint and Ismail and me will be doing a presentation to the summit of the book. So that may be a good date for all of us to think of something to demo if we want to.
Yeah. I think it might be, yeah, I mean, the work needs to go on the Visual Meta thing in terms of adoption and getting some publishers. And I almost see we can do two parallel tracks here. I mean, I know Peter's not here today because he's busy. He's got all sorts of loading on at the moment, but I know he's making progress with some interesting ideas. My gut feeling is to let that run on declutch from everything else. So in a sense of, on one level, we're going slowly towards the target at the rate that the sort of market allows. And at the same time, I think it's useful to keep thinking, just as, magically came out what Adam did with just, the data set, we just start to raise people's eyes up a bit, because the real benefit of this is in the longer term, when we get to the point where we have a clean infrastructure, because part of what we're really doing here is cleaning out the stable.
Yeah, I mean, my statement on that is very simple. BibTech is shit beyond my understanding. I didn't realize the issues. So that's just the way it is. So I think we've solved that by the extensions in Visual Meta, for instance, with author one, name equals middle name. So I don't think we need to go into that here. If we do have emails back and forth with Lisa, that's fine.
Oh, sure.
But there is support to go, if Bint wants us to go to IEEE and other organizations. That may be the time when we say, look, BibTech is supported by ACM inside Visual Meta, but if you really want to get value, here are the reasons you should do this other stuff. But that's something we can talk about other days in the week. I completely agree with Adam. I took it as a positive and nice thing, Adam, when you said, enough Visual Meta already. We need to talk about other aspects. I desperately want to do that too.
And it's not that the Visual Meta is a bad thing. It's a really good thing. The damn documents need to identify themselves, show an idea, and it's
just very, such a basic thing. It's just yeah.
So what can we do? Sorry,
but at the same time, what I really think, there are so many interesting people around this community that have dropped in a few times, and there is a risk if you go deep down the technical trenches that we lose a lot of interesting people. So it's really, I think it's good to at least have a day a week. Now you said that both days could be more mixed or everything, but
but I got a lovely email from Brendan, who was here the first time on Friday, saying he couldn't make it today, but he really, really likes the community. So that goes to address what you're saying. We need to make it a positive thing. And, we're now inviting a few more people to Future of Text book. That's all very nice. But Mark and I had a meeting with Dave Miller this morning at Southampton. He happens to be my primary advisor. And, there are so many interesting discussions there that I had in so many areas of this. But what we're doing in this community is actually implementing stuff in different ways. So, let's talk about, I mean, one thing that has been going around in this community, and I say that in the loose sense, of many, many years now, is some kind of demo day coming up. And then a lot of talk about what we should show. And then it kind of dies, because we don't have the means to communicate within ourselves. It's basically, we need a message board or something. I don't think we have that problem as strongly here. I think we have a more action-focused group of people anyway. But it would be great if, I mean, on that day, we're going to be presenting the future of text, a little bit of visual meta. I'll probably be doing the normal reader author thing. But it would be amazing if there was more integration with the visualization of the timeline, as in it wasn't, and now we do demo too. If it could actually be click here and magic. Yeah, Mark.
I just think because I funny enough, yeah, I sort of think down the same line, saying, okay, so what is it? You know, with these new people who are sort of now contributing the book, are there any new aspects or angles that, with this much of a run up, we can collectively take a thing and say, okay, interesting idea. How do we make something from that? Because to me, part of it is it will take many hands. I think one of the problems where, you know, the notion of demoing goes is, and it's especially around the tech community, a sense of, well, I've got to own the thing. I need to do this, and you know, otherwise I'm not tall enough to be on the ride. I don't see any shame in letting people say, I understand how to do this, but I can make that widget if that's what's needed. Even if the endpoint is just to be able to sort of visualize some notion that someone who has no grounding in that has. So we can say, look, here's a really interesting idea. This is what it might look like. See, I find that really quite powerful, because not only for what it shows, but the collaboration that needs to occur to make that happen, which is something that I think a lot of our collaboration systems miss. To me, a lot of our collaboration at the moment is locking cats and dogs in the same room and not letting them out, you know, unless they behave themselves, rather than people wanting to be there, even and not worrying about some people doing more than others and the kind of thing, because everyone's doing that because they're offering something up, and that's their reason for being there and their value in being there.
Adam, am I right in thinking that your key project is your workspace?
Yes, it is, but I also do experiments around. It has been a lot of text experiments. My key project is that workspace, but I think we need many tools and not just a single tool. I don't whenever I use my own things, I get reminded that I need different views and different tools around it, and also to integrate the standard tools that you use, word processors, text editors, and web stuff, and so on. So it's kind of a ecosystem. I mean,
because in one way, what you have and what Raphael has is the same, in the sense that it's a thinking space and presentation space, right? With me.
Yep, but yeah, it is thinking space. Most things are thinking spaces. A desk is a thinking space. A chair is a thinking space. So it's kind of it's a special exploration. It's not just thinking. It's exploration space, and it's a way of putting things close together to think deeply. Deeply around particular things. So it's also kind of a zoom thing, that you zoom into small things or small parts of bigger works to think around them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's an important point you made there, because part of it is, yes, being able to see things. Not everyone is happy spinning a lot of plates mentally at once. So in other words, the compass of what you can see at any one time will vary from person to person. And I think the sort of spaces you're talking about, one of the things they do is they visualize in more than the sense of making it visual. It's just that literally you can take things that in any other sense don't belong in the same bucket and sort of put them close together and say, do these have some connection or something? And that's a luxury most people don't have. Some people are very happy to do it. That's very few people. Some people have the odd tool. And so enabling that to happen more, I think it's really good. And so one of the questions to my mind becomes, stepping back from the really technical boundary of it, like, you know, what's it written in, is just, so what are the sort of affordances we want. Because the challenge for the sort of work that Adam and Raphael is doing is what normally happens is also, well, show us it when it's done, and then you finish it, and then people say, well, that's fine, but actually not what I wanted at all. What I want is something completely different. Throw it away, start over. So how can we discuss these things that are more useful to people who are making things, so that they actually have a chance to implement them? Or as importantly, to be able to have a discussion saying, well, what you're asking for is not possible in the way you describe it, but could it be done in a different way, for instance? Because more often than enough, I think it can. It's just, there's never the place where that conversation occurs. People sort of say, well, I've done my bit, I've said what I want, just go away and do it. And life's never that simple.
And to complement as well on what how we're going about it, so for example, is when you put content together in a place, you get more insight from the connections you see of content being next to each other, and be able to manipulate content, around. And I would say that text is complementary and not the main focus, because it's a visual platform. And we're also
Text is visual.
It is visual. I know it is visual, but I mean, what word can I use for things that are not text?
No, I'm just biting your head off. Of course,
No,
I agree
it's
with
interesting
you.
because it's what I'm writing for. Also, the Iconotes project that I'm working on my part-time. It's because I want to build this visual vocabulary, but I mean, vocabulary is already visual. When we draw the letter A, you're drawing the letter A, but we don't have this complementary word of talking about, we have iconography, we have imagery, we have all of these other words, but I'm trying to figure it out and to understand like how it would be the best way to present it. But I feel like text has the maximum power when it's used in the back of the card to complement the content that is being shown. So if I show a picture, there's a lot of information that is text-based around that picture. Who was the photographer? Where was the photo taken? What's the megapixel count, the size, the aspect ratio? All of these things are text-based, and they're always complementary to the image. So I'm very excited to explore those possibilities and even put visual meta on the card back so people can, have all of these data when they're working with content. And we're working on the second version of the demo because we've managed to implement a lot of the ideas that we want. So hopefully we'll have that for the symposium to show a new version of it, and then be even closer to release. Hopefully, who knows? Maybe we can release it this year finally as a early access.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark and I talked about Wendy today, who was my advisor and a big shot here, wonderful and frustrating lady in equal measure, slightly more wonderful. Anyway, she said something to me quite a few years ago that she doesn't really have time to write. She wants a way to author where she can just put things in, like here's a tweet, put it in. And not that I'm completely and utterly, blinded by the visual meta thing. The visual meta copy thing, I think, is a way of thinking for us. In other words, the clipboard. Because right now, also, my head is very much about concepts, as you've heard me go on and on about, right? But if we could work together to define what goes on the clipboard, but in a really rich and interesting way, then I could imagine, Adam, does your workspace have a name? And if you've told me before, can we just delete this part of the video?
No, it's currently unnamed. I have working names, but nothing.
Okay, so Adam's unnamed.
It's just a space currently.
The tool previously known as nothing.
Space is okay. Space is not an Adam space. That's a good name. Adam space, copy and paste into me or into author is fine. But how can we make it a real magical copy? Like the whole notion of glossaries, I think, is so important. Glossaries and concepts. So imagine you're reading a PDF. There's a glossary term. Currently, you cannot easily copy that as a unit. But could we develop some kind of a unit that could have all the citations behind it and multimedia stuff? I'm in no way against that. Yeah, Raphael.
Sometimes when I copy text from an article or someplace, usually when I paste it in, sometimes it comes with this was copied from, and then a link to that place, right?
Yeah.
So if there's already a way for you to change the content that you copied and augment it with, you know, all kinds of things, that would be incredible, because then you're sharing, you know, content how it's meant to be shared with with the citations and the provenance and all of the other things.
You saw the little 1 minute thing I did where I copied text from a picture,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you saw that. Of course, Adam, you even commented on it. You know, that's magic. I actually showed it to my mother last week, and she didn't understand why it's magic, because for her, it's text. She doesn't have the notion of an image and text on a document. She doesn't use a computer, right? So that was a bit of a wake-up call that we're not in Harry Potter land with real magic yet, right?
You didn't get the magic phrase. That's lovely, darling. I'll put it straight on the fridge.
Well,
We still don't have-
it's basically when you get into a field and you solve a problem, like visual meta, it's solving a problem that most people don't even know exists.
Well, there's another interesting thing I'm sort of hearing you describe as concepts, and this is on the less sort of hard-edged, almost process thing. It's almost saying, so how do I pass an idea around without bending it out of shape? When you say, what are the bits we need?
That's a nice way of saying it.
And it's a bit like if you pick up an egg, you need to hold it softly in your hand and you break it. So it's as you pass these ideas around, how do we do it in a way that the sort of the basket we put it in doesn't bend the thing out of shape? And I don't say I have an answer for that. I mean, it's easy to say, what should we do? I'm not suggesting I know the answer, but I think it's something that's germane to what we're looking at here.
In the PhD bit I've been struggling to write today, it's about PDF being introduced, easy to find why and all of that stuff. But it's been interesting to read about the competitors, either before or right afterwards. And they were competing as a print to digital document. This kind of thing is finding an open way to do print to clipboard. Of course, there's been many, many exciting things done, like publish and subscribe and all kinds of stuff. But if we can manage to do it in a super open way that anybody can take advantage, and it actually can be demonstrated going through different systems, that could be incredible. I mean, like copying from Adam, let's say 3 or 4 items just by drag selecting across the screen, pasting it into author as a thing, and then later on you can extract that, and it's those things in the same spatial relationship, not just a list,
So how do we sorry, Adam, go ahead.
And another very similar interaction to copy paste is giving things inboxes. What if every document had an email address, conceptually? So you could email a few things to a document, so it shows up in the inbox for that document or that project. If you're writing something, you just email, or and you will get that in the inbox for that project without actually leaving the other context you were in. If you see something that is relevant to something else, you just email that project, that file. It's a similar thing, but it's kind of a one-step process. It's not the paste part. You just send it to a document, and this connects to something we discussed quite a few months ago, that documents should not be a singular thing, that documents should have many spaces, many tabs, many inboxes, lists, or the margin notes, the inbox, the scratch pad, the concept map. A document is not a singular thing, especially when you work with it, or when it's a project. Later on, it becomes maybe it becomes a singular thing. But what we're doing with Visual Meta is not making it multiple things again. So we shouldn't view the document just as a single straight line, but several lists and several things.
So when the email thing, which is really phenomenally interesting, it's kind of like a document has an API.
Yep.
Right. So one of the things that was really powerful with Doug's NLS was, okay, I'll just explain in terms of an example. Doug and I were in his office one day. I had my then modern laptop Mac, and he had his NLS, and we decided to do a speed test. So the speed test was, we had some friends in common. We mentioned one name, see who could most quickly get the phone number out. And you know how I had to tap through and do a few things. He didn't break eye contact with me, and then it was on the screen. He typed in the command, open address book, and find this bit. Boom, there it was, right? So when he talked about linking or jumping, it was also, you should be able to jump commands or jump data and jump and retrieve. So this is very, very Doug level thinking. For instance, these 10 documents, go in there and find their references or find their data, or find the name of the authors, whatever it is, and give it back to me. Put it in a new document or whatever it is. This kind of thing is really potentially very interesting, yes.
It seems that, I mean, two things spring to mind listening to this. One is that, not thinking what it might be called, but in a sense, there's a certain cultural baggage to the term document. And what we're really discussing is something that moves beyond document, because I think it has such a cultural weight that having something that is what it is now and what we want to be in the future is quite a stretch for a lot of people, which makes it difficult, to understand what we're trying to, what we're suggesting is possible. At the same time, something that actually kind of came up in yet another sort of conversation involved around the Tinderbox tool is that notice trying to get people to stop thinking in terms of applications, because it's actually a slightly infantilizing thing, because you get in this habit that tool X tells me what lines I have to color inside. So I learn how to use tool X, and then my exploration space becomes, I want to do this, but it doesn't work like tool X's. This is wrong. And so the app-centric thinking is something, again, we rather in the way that we need more flexible documents, is to not sort of think from the context of the world within a singular app.
But Mark, this is where Raphael and I have a benefit, because in the graphic and visual media, that is exactly how it works. Even Adobe was never Photoshop. Well, maybe earlier on, but it's always the Adobe Creative Suite.
No, indeed. And
I'm just saying that in that field, jumping between
absolutely.
apps was really core to the use. But they of course develop their own ecosystem. So to open that up to a wider field, absolutely.
But I sense in knowledge tools, it's particularly pernicious, because what happens is, instead of thinking about the knowledge, what it is they want to transfer around or reshape or revisualize, people get stuck at the level of thinking, what button do I press, or why can't somebody just make it simple for me? I don't want to understand how anything works despite being complex, which is not the way in which we make progress. Stepping outside that, don't misread the comment meaning that applications are bad. That's not the point. It's the human fallibility of the way we use them, and teaching ourselves to break out of that learned habit where a computer says no, as saying, look, this is a thing that lets me do the following things, and think of it more in terms of its inputs and not just what it offers internally, but its inputs and its outputs, which gets us back to the point about Adam said about things like documents having an inbox.
But for a question for everybody then, what do you think of as being knowledge tools?
So many things can be knowledge tools, and we can even separate it as analog and digital knowledge tools and how they're complementary. Like an encyclopedia is a knowledge tool, but a blank piece of paper is a knowledge tool. Wikipedia is a knowledge tool. Google can be a knowledge tool.
The reason I'm asking is I assume we agree with Mark's notion that we should be able to jump between different pieces of software seamlessly. But the question becomes, which pieces of software really are core knowledge tools, right? Or rather, to use the word applications, what are the applications we want to support, right? What are the things?
When I said knowledge tools, it's a loose term, and in the context, in the context I was sort of thinking about, most of those in the context of that conversation were annotation tools.
Mhm.
that sort of thing. It could be wider. It seems particularly bad there because a lot of people have ended up in the habit where they've got to the point where the way you learn things is by collecting ever more stuff. And then there's a magical software phase that no one's quite described where amazing things happen. And the reality is that may happen probably for the person that made the tool because it's scratching their itch, but probably for everybody else, it's a long way distant. And yet the tools are still wonderful, rich, and have all sorts of useful things. So in other words, we're using them. The way in which we try and use them is wrong.
So
it also goes back to you were talking about Doug, and so in his system, things were integrated. And nowadays, everything is fragmented. So there isn't we don't have one single tool as a knowledge tool that is interconnected. We're getting APIs to connect to different apps to extract information so that things can have a conversation. But we're still in this fragmented world where we have thousands of apps that do each their own thing and they're not connected. So even if you wanted to have a tool that connects these different things, you can't. So you always stop in your tracks. If you're having a train of thought, you get interrupted because you have to keep switching either apps or different platforms and different logins and all of these things.
I saw a tweet by Max a few days ago. I just found it that relates to this, I think. He's under @emax on Twitter, part of our community here. 10 years after finishing my PhD at MIT Sale, we still haven't solved the information scraps problem. Information that people need to keep track of for various reasons that end up between the cracks in the digital and analog tools we use to keep track of. That seems to be part of what we're talking about, right?
Definitely. And my scraps are literally scraps of paper. So that's I'm dealing.
Because when Mark talks about annotation, yeah, exactly. What is an annotation? Is a to-do item a completely different beast from an annotation? I would say it's exactly the same. Just one of them happens to have a citation attached to it.
Well, doesn't this get back to, I think, what Adam was hinting at, in the sense of it's part of the thing is we compartmentalize things at our peril, because part of the whole idea of sort of exploration spaces is to say something that's as mundane as a get milk tomorrow, and I put it next to, my wonderful idea for the novel that's going to change the world. I mean, on one level, they're both scraps. So this is in a sense where the rigor of and the binary nature of computers, and therefore the rigor that the systems have to have at some point in their construction, work against us, because essentially we get into premature formalization. We give things seemingly neat handles so we can put them in neat, tidy boxes. But that's a bit like tidying up the room so that you can see the floor, but everything's now just stuffed in a box and you've no idea what's in it. We've all done that when someone important's coming round, quick, make it all look tidy. And then you spend the next 6 months trying to find all the stuff you tidied away. And we do that with our information all the time. And I definitely see this in the communities that I'm involved in support, helping people with, in some annotation tools. That happens a lot. And it's not deliberate. And it's not because people are stupid. It's sort of just, where we are. And I think we need to move beyond it.
I usually tend to separate into 3 parts how I deal with content. I'm either consuming content, researching, searching, reading, or I'm compiling things. So sometimes I find something, a citation, a book or something, I add to my list of things that are piled up. And then there has to be a moment of looking at these things and putting them where they need to be. I find that these 3 processes, they can't coexist, because, for example, if every image you save, you rename and put it in the correct place, the amount of time that takes gets you out of the flow of whatever you're doing. So at least I find it better to do what I need to do, either research and then add things to this pile, and then from this pile you put them where they need to be. but I'm doing that because the systems are not interconnected, right? So it's easier for me to dedicate time to each part of the process for that process, instead of like in Doug's world, I would do it all in one place because things are working together and it would be easier from my point of view. But
As you
how we
know,
are right now.
well, as you know, in Author, you can do paragraph focus mode. Obviously, you can do it in other word processors too. But I'm thinking a little bit along those lines, like not only just hide the background, but really go into a specific workspace for a piece of work, but then go back to the main piece of work, right?
So let's say, for example, if I wanted to add an image to the document I'm writing, you could stop in the paragraph, find the image, and then add the image, and then continue writing. Or you can just put, under parentheses, insert photo here, and then continue working. And then you go back, find the photo, and add it as a different process. So then I try to separate these processes so that it doesn't break my concentration flow.
Yeah, because most tools now, so I would say the current paradigm is that something that seemed to be good is the thing that allows you to stop exactly what you're doing, forget all about that, and find the thing you're looking for with the minimum of fuss, completely ignoring the fact that the one thing it's done is completely break your train of thought. And something else that just came to mind from this morning's conversation with Dave Millard and Fred and others was, because we have to be talking about sort of narrative and how you do this sort of narrative in non-creative writing, where you're just trying to help the reader, the consumer of this information, to follow your train of thought, and the sort of notation process. And it seems to me that's something we should do more of. So in other words, it is so exactly as you said, finding a way that perhaps isn't as brutal as, insert picture here, which you then remember just after you sent it to sort of final print, but a way in which you hit yourself. So like, I'm not in the mind space to do this bit now, but I know where I'm going. I know there's a gap here. I need to sort of fill that. And if I don't, people who are following along need to know that I know I left a gap there.
I can show a quick example here that that Pitch is solving rather nicely. Let me share my screen. But obviously this is limited to what Unsplash has. So let's say, for example, I'm writing a little bio for some people, and then I need to get a photo. I don't have to, open my browser to get the photo. Since this is connected to Unsplash, I can just press I for image and then type in like sunflower and then click the photo, and that's done. I'm still in my creative flow, but I found an image that I needed and I added to my place. So when things get more and more integrated, it gets easier and easier to stay in your creative flow with different multimedia aspects.
Why do you feel that is more of a flow rather than Command Tab to Photos or Lightroom or something like that, copy and paste?
Because you leave your workspace. If I have to Command Tab to Google Chrome, there might be a tab open for, I don't know, WhatsApp or something, and it draws attention to me. Something's going to call my attention.
Okay, so that's a fair point, and that's something that happens to me a lot. So yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
But guys, one thing we do need to probably discuss and continue is whom do we want to augment first, and what activities do we want to augment, right?
Yeah,
Let's take someone we know well, like ourselves. We are really discussing a lot of things that we have in common here. Bridging digital analog, being in kind of one mode and doing some things later, the kind of automatic to-do list thing that is not interrupting your flow. Yeah, there are so many things that we are experts at those problems. We know those problems very well, and I think we are very typical for many knowledge workers. So I think having it can be hard to really feel the pain points of others, like students. It can be hard to remember how life as a student really was later on. And so I think it's
I'm a
good to call.
student.
Yeah, you're
Mama.
a student, but there are many kinds of students, so you can get a bit. And you can have the philosophy that you're always a student and always a beginner, of course. But there are also first year of college students, and there are PhD students, and there are people who study all the time. And I think we study all the time different things. So I think we should be much more specific, and I think a very good person to start with is yourself.
There's one thing, I think you're right, Adam, and before it falls out of my head, an obvious thing is to be able to go back on Zoom meetings and find stuff, transcripts. Of course, big companies are doing something. The one thing that annoyed me today was my calendar view of the past. It's obviously quite shit. So I could imagine a really simple interface where you have a calendar view, and it could just be day, columns. Let's keep it simple. But what you see in that view, not in terms of the column, one column per day, but in terms of the rows, is almost anything you want that is time related. So you would be able to, on the side, say, import from my calendar. You have a normal calendar view. Below that, it could be the photographs you took that day. Below that, it could be videos you posted. It could be videos you viewed. It could be your timeline. It could be any documents in your field that was published. So this thing can go back decades instantly by importing that kind of data. And so you have ways to shift back and forth, and then somehow be able to do searches in this. So I can say, Adam said or wrote something, and then it'll show me very similar to our timeline view that you built. The citation timeline. These are the bits where, okay, and then we could do to dive in and out of time. So much is lost because we can store stuff, but we can't find it. It does not go back all the way to Bush's piece. They're automatically added to it, nothing really manually added.
Yeah, and there's an issue, I think, of I'm kind of see a premature sorting. I tend to keep pretty much every email via obvious bits of sort of spam.
Email must be in there, yes.
But it happens to be email, but it could be something else. I'm using email as a proxy for a process where, I'm constantly being bombarded with people saying, organize it better and stuff. And I actually found that the moment I stopped over optimizing the input, it started to be useful. So what I tend to do now is I let it pile up for a bit, and then I go down as a discrete activity. I just take some time and look through and think, right, that relates to this, because otherwise I sort it under topic, or I sort it under thing. And actually what I do is I pull the trail apart. So when I look, it's quite interesting when I go back and where I put things together. I know I wouldn't have guessed that ordering when I started. And in a future, much more capable system, maybe I wouldn't need to sort of sort them at all. But basic keyword-based retrieval is way off from where we think it is. And I'd rather live in the reality. So I rather than build something that I know won't work in my current time, I'm prepared to take a bit of pain in sorting it out. But what the key thing in that is again is premature formalization. And I don't mean, say splitting, work emails from home emails, so not that sort of thing, or, be it in your annotation app or whatever. But it's more the sense of being so arrogant as to assume that anything that flashes before your eyes, you immediately know, almost before you've read it, what it means and where it goes. Put like that just seems supremely arrogant and hubristic, and so that's something that I think feeds into what we're doing, in the sense, so you need to capture this stuff and know this. But far more valuable is exactly the sort of thing that you just described, where you have an organization or research mechanism, or whatever we want to call it, that actually has a temporal, its primary access is temporal. because that's how we live, you know. We're not multi-dimensional beings yet, thank God. So it's there, and funnily enough, it's the least well described, supported, and visualized aspect of all our informational work.
Raphael?
I'm going to answer Frod's question first by apologizing because it's a link to a book. So this book, Supernormal, it's by a Japanese guy called Naoto Fukusawa together with an American author called Jasper Morrison. And they talk about ordinary things and these the sensation of something that becomes commonplace. And Freud asked, who should we argument first, or what should we tackle first? And I would say to go back to the most ordinary thing and something that is the most common for people, like in their daily life. I really like the time aspect of it because it's something that we all share. We see the sun go up, we see the sun go down. And that's something tangible. Once we start talking about weeks and months, that's a human construct. And then, you know, it starts to go a little bit farther from something that is more common. But it's still something, I mean, everybody knows what a week is, what a weekend is. But some people start their weekends on Sunday, and I hate those calendars that start on Sunday. It doesn't make sense to me. So it's not for everybody, you know, but once we talk about the day, 24 hours, it's something that is more tangible. So I would think of solving things related to daily life that is more common to most humans. And I know text is the answer to that, but you know, the argumentation part is, I would think of it in that context.
I think the most important thing with time or temporal timelines is that they are stable in a way. There are so many things around places, documents, and everything is changing in digital, but time is one of the few constants we have. Of course, you can edit the document multiple times, but then we can put that document in at several places in the timeline, every edit. But it's very good, and that is why what I really liked with the timeline experiment we did here, the Mark and I and we, is that things stay in place, so you can get a sense of where things are. If you work with the material, you get to know it. You get to know the place of every document, and that people love their desktop spaces. You know, the messy desktop on the computer. Technologists try to remove it. Yeah, that kind of desktop as well. But I mean the desktop on the computer, the background, where you put all your messy files. And I think the timeline is quite similar in that you get the sense of it was this month, or it was around the birthday of that person that I wrote this document. I know it was in the winter because, or in Raphael's winter, our summer.
It was in the morning, it was in the evening.
Yeah, you have sense of time. You have a sense of time, and especially, if the things have a fixed location, I think we should move towards more fixed locations, so you can really remember things and get a sense of places in the digital realm. So, a key concept here is to not remove things and just make a new list every time you look at it, but rather fade it away and make some things stand out and some things fade away into the background. So they still are there in the same place, but some things are more highlighted. That can really tap into our sense of location, and time is excellent for that, timelines.
And the fading really helps too, in a way, because actually it's still, you know, the point is, if the thing that you're looking at is surrounded by seemingly way too many other things faded outside, what it's telling you is it's a really messy space. So apart from finding the thing you wanted or interacting with it, it's also a really useful reminder, because in some cases it is the wake-up call that this is a difficult, messy and complex problem, for instance, you're looking at, even if you want it to not be so. And we elide mentally, we often elide that because it just makes the problem easier to think about. But it is nice to be able to see something situated in that more complex sphere without having to interact with it, but not having it hidden from you, so that it leads you to a false conclusion about the context or the complexity or the boundary of the problem.
Yeah, so I did a plugin for called Hyperwords at the beginning of what would become Liquid. And one of the things we tested for The Economist was a graph view. And the fun thing with that, what became really interesting, is that exactly what you guys are saying, time, apart from in an Einstein sense, doesn't change. What has happened, it happened at the time it happened, end of story. So if you say, show me the price of gold in pesos for the last 10 years, you can then easily say, show me lunar cycles over the last 10 years, right? And of course, very strange things can happen, but it also means that in this type of thing we're talking about, we can do really graphical things too. For instance, we can do sentiment analysis over our meetings, and we can color code whether they seemed happy or not. We can then have another column of what the weather was like that day in various people's locations. It's almost infinite what we can do, but if we decide for ourselves what we think would be useful, it could be a very powerful presentation. And of course, most of this time stuff is API gettable, right? And we have to decide how we're going to deal with how that integrates. One of the weird things is if you record video and you save the video file, it will record the date of the saved video file. The individual frames of video will not have time. But if we can solve that somehow, that means that we can have lots of different points of view from a conference or event or whatever overlapping completely. It could be amazingly interesting.
Well, plus the fact when you save something like a video, actually, by the time you've done it and done whatever you've done with it, what you've actually done is you've saved the time of the last, in a sense, the time you processed it, not the time of the event, which in a sense is really what is the time that is significant. And I know those can be saved as separate metadata, but it's an interesting point.
So somewhat related here, I did I put this is a feature of the textbook, the PDF, all the pages of the PDF here, and these are real PDF pages. This is related to having things in place. I experimented with the idea that all the pages are laid out here permanently in this grid view. So whenever you open this document again, it will not like resize this column. It will be now it's nine pages completely randomly, but it can vary depending on how long the document is, and it's good to have, for different documents, to have different number of things in the column so they look unique. This grid view, you can even experiment with having them not in a grid view but some other, so every document gets its own way of laying them out automatically. But here I use the same technique as with the timeline, where we when you search something hyper, then it's a bit slow here on both on Zoom and but here now every document in the future textbook with the word hyper is everything else is faded away, and when if you click on a page, you get it here immediately, and you can read it. So you have them side by side. You can move around and look at different pages. I guess it's very tiny for you, but it's readable on my screen, and it's a real document here. You can select text if you want to and do things with a copy. And so this is we wanted a minority report for documents here. Frode talked about minority reports a while ago, or just mentioned it. but the underlying principle here is, now you can't see me here, the underlying principle here is that things stay in place. So you can get to know that, just as we can get to know a physical book, we take it and yeah, we have a sense of where in that book
Yeah.
it was in the end, it was around that big rose thing, and you have a sense of location. So I really think there is something to really explore here. We're having a sense of location of book, a fixed way of laying out the pages.
Yeah,
Not
I
the
think that's
pa-
very
the pa-
nice. I completely agree. I mean, with my Command Shift B, it's the same thing. It doesn't remove anything. It fades out what isn't relevant. So
Yeah, and I was really glad that you did it. We were really on the same page there with the kind of fading,
And we could see
highlighting,
we
and
were on the same page because the page didn't move.
yeah, but it's really important because we are experts on, or every mammal is an expert of remembering places where things are, how you get food, how you get mates, where there are, so we're designed to remember things where they are, and you can
I completely agree.
So
and
I have to ask you a question. Just in this, two things. Number one, Adam, the document on the right could obviously, Ted Nelson style, have a transparent thing showing where it was on the left, right?
yeah.
Right. So how about the next stage where you select text, copy it, paste it into author as a citation, blah, 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 you're all done. However, author pings this system to say it has now been used in this document.
Yeah, that is possible. So you leave a personal trail of where it's
in
used.
this, you can choose to see what you have cited and where it's gone. So I hate the phrase because it's over and underused this day. It's a backlink.
Well, where that's really interesting also, and actually, I'm glad Adam explained. I thought he was playing Minesweeper, so now we knew what that grid was. But no, I think that's really super. And the other thing I thought, when you start to do the fade out, I thought, oh, right. So the other really nice thing we get from this is we can say, having got that selection, move it off into more of a graph space where we want. I found these bits. So we get that lovely spatial thing. You said, yeah, it's here, it's this position in the book. But we can also go off to, right, these are the pertinent bits of this, and I can now do other associated things. And linking back to what Frey just mentioned is that therefore a document can sort of see itself, visualize itself in the context of the things it's talking about. So you could look at you can look at your document from the context of all these things around it, and perhaps see additional crosscuts or relationships that you might otherwise have missed.
So absolutely, and so furthermore, with the backlink thing, imagine if Adam selects something there, and he copies it into an email, sends it to Raphael, and says, "Can you do blah blah with it?" Raphael takes it from there into his system, whatever it might be, does blah blah, and the original system Adam has is continuously updated as to the status of that. So we've been working very hard with Visual Meta to keep text very simple. So the next stage, of course, is to do the exact opposite, where I like to think of it as an iceberg. The little bit that is visible to the user is completely tiny compared to all the data that actually travels, interactive data that's connected with its source, and anything else that has permission and usefulness to be connected with.
And also here, that kind of overview, the overview of a document. So what I'm imagining here is that we have kind of Nelson style, but even more better than Ted Nelson style here, that you, on the left side of this document, you have your library, all your books, PDF. You click on a book, you get all the pages here. You click on a page. And I imagine that these pages have different symbols on them, where your highlights are, where your favorite pages are. Some maybe you have removed some pages or grayed them out because they are not relevant, so only a few are highlighted maybe. here, and in the next view you can see then you see the document, and then beside it you see your annotation. So it's kind of a it's a column interface here. Every step to the right is deeper into the document here.
But regardless of the sort of the grid, or
Yep.
the dimensions of the grid, what I find fascinating in this is what you're sort of, when you said and you can see all these other bits and pieces, what you're in essence doing is you're externalizing the mental map most of us keep. So when you mention a book that we've read, we're thinking, okay, it's over there, sitting on that shelf. 3/4 of the way through, there's a page with, that I remember it had a picture on the top right-hand corner. And underneath that, there's a really interesting thing. And in a sense, this is externalizing that.
Yeah. But the big question here for all of us and for the text community, for the thinkers here, is if 2 dimensions like we have here, or 3 dimensions with some sort of interaction and time and so on, should it actually be 3 dimensions? Should it be should your documents be placed in 3 dimensions here? Of course, it's projected on a 2-dimensional screen. That is the limits we have currently. But should it be 3-dimensional? Should we have a memory castle, an actual 3-dimensional castle you can go and put every book and every page on? Is that because the memory artists say that we should construct a memory palace in our head and remember things? But what if the computer really draws the full memory palace for us, so we can easily integrate it?
I think we should definitely go into the 3rd dimension, but I think it's also incredibly difficult to do so, because look at our desks, as we talked about earlier, they get massive. Things get hidden behind something else. So it's not a panacea by any means. However, let's not overvalue the documents we're reading, because, for instance, right now, as I told you, I'm looking at the beginning of PDF for context for my thesis. A lot of the information I'm getting is various websites with almost nothing in them that I just use for citations. So it's really, really nice when you're reading a well-done academic paper and you can do things like you're showing, and then you're making a new paper. But very often the sources are disparate: paper book, printed books, as well as digital, this, that, and the other. So very often I think these spaces are very transient. So if we're studying the Bible or something that is important to someone, yes, absolutely, those are the levels we can do. We can do a memory palace, but memory palace really is for memorization, not interaction. And I think when we are doing a learning reading, it's the interaction of being able to do quick things. What I would want to see, Adam, from what you're doing there, is for you to develop something that is so complex that you can manage to use it to flit about, and the rest of us watching have no fucking clue what's going on. Of course, we can do the same training, right? But it means that if you want to, pull forward the ones with hypertext, hide everything else. What about if this? What about that? Bum, 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 bum. That's Minority Report. It's not just doing this.
I mean, the one place where I could see a 3rd dimension being useful as opposed to just another affordance is with certain documents where they have basically a number of temporal states. So I could see in an more in something like a work context or a government context. So here's this bill, it's going through the national parliament, whatever. It's gone through all these sort of milestones. Okay, well, wait a minute, let's roll back. See, and suddenly you'll see whole chunks of it sort of disappear or reappear or something. That could actually be quite an interesting way, because it's offloading some of the sort of parked cognitive effort that some of the people interacting with the document are having to make just to remember where the damn parts are. It's quite a niche thing, but I mean, I think it speaks to the fact that we don't need to use all these affordances all the time, and to a certain extent, having them offered to us at the wrong moment also is often perhaps unhelpful. So that's actually another challenge, is to work out, when being able to do all these other things actually is a help, or when they are just yet another thing blinking at you from the edges to distract you from the thing that you're doing. I really like. I think there's some really interesting stuff in that little sort of visualization there.
But I wonder if 3 dimensions they can't. They could even be more natural or more. We are so used to 3 dimensions in regular life, so so it could be in a way easier to show grandma that she walks to this room to find the document with some sort of interface than to go down to that folder and right click to open this. So it could be a, of course you can have a big map of everything, a 2-dimensional map where everything is stored. That maybe that could work, and even very young people immediately do the pinch and zoom things, and my kids called a book a fake iPad early on.
I'm gonna have to go, guys. I have to take care.
Look forward to Friday, Raphael.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
Well, I mean, in a game, in a run-around shoot 'em up, why do we need 3 dimensions there? Right? We need 3 dimensions because something else is hidden in 3 dimensions. So it's basically a hunting thing, right? And of course, what do we enjoy? I think that's another interesting question. What we enjoy in the game is the movement of yourself and the projectiles. That means that you hit your target. Very, very basic human stuff. So in terms of the interactions we're discussing, efficiency is important, but also enjoyment. Right, to make it enjoyable to go through it. You know, the whole thing going to get a document in another room may easily become a waste of time and too many clicks or something, but it may also be the thing that makes it actually enjoyable to keep working.
I think the other aspect of this to explore is to find the sort of the anti-pattern to what we're discussing, in the sense of the person who sees Alan's visualization there and is completely floored by it and cannot understand it at all. And why do I say that? It's not to look for bad. It's just to say, so, you know, what are the assumptions that we're making because we just understand this, because we look at this stuff a lot. I mean, because the hardest thing, you know, the unknown unknowns are the hardest thing to figure out, and they tend to leap out at the wrong moment and assault you. So there's something to think about there. It's not, and the other part nested within that is then to say, okay, is this something you learn, or is it, you know, like some of us, you know, I'm useless. It doesn't handhead or foot. I'm useless at ball games, and it doesn't matter how hard I try. I'm not going to get better. And it doesn't bother me at all that some people are fantastically good at it, and I'm glad that somebody else can do it because I don't have to, because I'd be rubbish at it, and that would be horrid. But there is this sort of thing, so what can I learn? Which I think goes back to the bootstrapping thing. So, you know, at the center you have the Doug, who has a fabulous understanding of this. And then you abstract from that, and you say, well, what's a pattern I can take from that to a wider audience, and they can still meaningfully, they can realistically learn to do it, and they can get real value from it.
I'll be back in 1 minute.
Yeah, though it's likely not to be the full richness, and that shouldn't bother us. I mean, there is an element of fear of missing out, and this is another problem, especially with things like productivity apps, where everyone's made to feel rubbish because the person next door is clearly far more organized than they are. I mean, that's a Bond I escaped from a long time ago. But you know, it is that sort of thing. And so there is.
But I have a hunch that making things more visual will help. In general, will help people. The computers are kind of hiding things in search and list, and making things a bit more visible. That at least that works for me. But I think it's watching kids learn the digital things. Text comes way later than just clicking and seeing things.
Yeah.
So I think it's good to visualize and show things more.
No, we do. I mean, in the sense that it's the thing, you can recognize, you can recall a shape. I think about this a lot. If I mean, actually my wife has, discovered actually very little visual memory at all, but I can go somewhere I was driven to in the back of a car as a child, and I'll suddenly think, oh, wait a minute, I remember that corner. I don't remember it, so I see it. But the point is that juxtaposition of goodness knows what is recallable, and that's why I think that to me is part of the power of visualization. This visual display is that I'm not having to mechanically crawl through it in an ordered fashion. I can very quickly jump straight through lots of layers of extraction to see, that's the thing.
When you say jump, I think we in computers have a very different notion of jump. Jump links and jump. It's not really a jump. It's kind of a hyper jump or teleport in most cases.
Yeah.
You completely lose where you were. Mm-hmm. And I really think that is a big mistake. We really need to see where we went from and where we walked the path there, and also where we can go further. So the web pages are a classical example, because when you click on a link, everything is removed and you get a completely new page. In a way, that is insanity. I understand why, because at the dawn of time, it was very resource intensive and the screens were small, and it's hard to, but nowadays there is no reason to have a miniature of the page you come from somewhere on the side, so you know what the last page were. So when you come back 10 minutes later or 2 days later to that tab, you can see what the previous page were and why on earth you landed on this page. And with the previous interface that I shown, I really want this to be to be really shown that you should really be able to see where you come from. You see your library on the far left. It's not there because I only have a single PDF in here. But imagine that this big hole here to the left is your full library. And it's very clear that you come from, you selected this book, and it should be very clear. Now it's not very clear. It's a very light blue that you can't even almost not see on your screen, but I can see what page is selected here. And when you select something here, it should be very clear what is selected, and you can go back and forth. You have the overview in reach. You can see it, and you can put as much as your monitor affords. And you can focus as much as you want just by moving it slightly.
Another interesting affordance that comes out of that is, positing I imagine in my imagination, inserting the sort of library in around this, is that with something in a sense which is a collection, which obviously the future of text is, that so in that sort of context, you're potentially also sort of building a manifest almost, list, if you will. I mean, I'm trying to avoid the word list because that takes a whole different direction. But in a sense, you're seeing where things come from. That, again, that's a really. I find it just makes it richer, because otherwise it does become a list in the sense of being a linear list, and that takes you into different contexts and a different thinking space.
Last week, when presenting what we're doing to somebody, I can't honestly remember who. The question of payment and all of that and revenue and all of that came up, and I said, no, this is, passion. And so the person said, oh, so you're idealists. And just having come off the call with Vint and Ismail, where Ismail was spending quite a few minutes talking about the climate report and the slow uptake on the COVID vaccine. He's been a scientist for 30 years working on climate change, and it's really, really saddening and scary for him. And when you look at, especially Norwegians, maybe not so much Swedes, the Gulf Stream, it may actually stop, then we're fucked, right? So I don't think we're idealists. I think we're realists. I think we're addressing real problems. So that's why when we're looking at the things we're talking about today, I think we need to decide on a few things we really, really want to augment first. An understanding of your own timeline or this or that, something to really let's say it's a huge presentation on the 9th. It won't be that huge, but let's pretend. Standing there and saying, we have these problems. We have decided to really knuckle down and focus on this single augmentation. And let's show you what we've done, right? So
I completely agree with you, Frode, and that is why it kind of ties back to the visual meta. It's an enabler, but we should get the eye on the prize, which are the most valuable interactions we need to have that we don't have currently. For the preservation part, that the documents are kept, that you can own things or have things, is close to the top on the list for me, and also that you can rework material, that you're free to extract things or take things out and not just use a singular interface by someone else. How, in a way, we have more walked away from it with PDF in a few steps from Adobe just controlling everything. Now you can read a PDF, but I still can't buy a book and use it in a PDF book that is encrypted. I can't use it in my systems because I'm not Adobe or really tied to Adobe DRM system. So it's really sad that you have to buy a book and then pirate it just to get it into your system. It's to preserve things and to really access and have them is it's not an interaction, but it enables interactions.
Yes.
I also think the point you started out on, saying, it's sort of, show that you're actually not necessarily completely solving, but working towards a solution in a thorny space is really useful, because that becomes a tent pole. But it allows you to say that other things are possible, because I think something that tends to happen a lot is people make really cool stuff that in principle could do an awful lot of things, but until somebody comes along and actually hangs it on something, it doesn't have a grounding. I mean, even if it transpires that everyone said, "Oh, that's marvelous, I think it's useless for that, but we're all going to use it for this," that's a win, because it's gone somewhere. The tendency is if it doesn't speak to an actual end or resolving something that people can make a judgment on.
So who are we really augmenting first? Is it a lifelong student or an actual student or not student at all? Is it a government official? Is it someone on social media? Is it someone trying to learn about climate stuff? Who do we want to make a big, remember Doug had Joe. Back then, we didn't have to say who Joe was. But, let's say we have Joe 2. Who is Joe 2?
Well, I have one thought, and it's the sort of person who isn't really defined in a way at the moment. And it exists actually across learning and work and almost personal stuff, which is, well, I don't want to call it knowledge work, because that now has been taken to mean something else, but this sort of sense making of how things fit together, because we all have to do this, whether we do it in the course of study, whether we do it in the course of just keeping our life on track, or whether we do it because we work in an organization, be it public or private, that has to do stuff. And it's moving along this temporal axis that we've talked about. And yes, at the extremities, people are just focused on doing little particular, very complicated tasks. But it's keeping a track of the whole. And this is something that really came across to me when I was looking at some Wikipedia stuff in my PhD studies. And actually, there are all sorts of people doing lots of stuff around the edges. In the middle, not so much. And yet, the sort of things, the things that we're sort of looking at speak to potentially addressing issues in that area. Sorry, Adam, I cut you off.
I think one group that I want to augment is the people who don't do things who don't only do more things and faster things, but really people who think deeply about things and think slowly and over long time, and how you come back to some of my books I read I have a few favorite books that I reread over and over again, and usually I get more value out of those books than a completely new hyped book. So it's I want to find a way of taking, and I think most of us have written really brilliant margin notes and small, and I heard many very, very interesting thoughts here on the office hours, especially, even more so, even more than in the book, in the Future of Text book. I think we really have a gold mine here. I've rewatched many of the video recordings, so a way of extracting the really, really good ideas and working with them over time, not just giving up on them, polishing them, taking them further, putting those two important quotes from a big 400-page book and really thinking about those two quotes. And so I want to augment the person who wants to do that, who really wants to do a very heavy curation over time, that really thinks deeply about things, because I think they are ones who move things forward. Everyone moves things forward in a sense, but there is a great value to doing better things, not just more things. Of course, better is better, but I mean, really working hard and deeply on things it's really hard, and they need better tools, because most tools is for doing things quicker, just quicker. And quick is good, but quick doesn't lead to greater quality most of the time. It just leads to more things per time unit.
Yeah, and that's a sort of probably just an acquired aspect of life in a broadly capitalist world. Is time is money sort of thing, and that's not necessarily where the persistent good things come from. So I think I very much like the point you're raising.
So yes, let me just. I think the emphasis there is really worthwhile, Adam, and it's nice to have that highlighted. So I'm thinking one of the things we really need is text transcripts of these talks, no question. And some big companies are working on it, but also some of the machine learning stuff that Apple has does actually allow any audio to be fed in and to be turned out text. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it is available. We don't have to develop that. So that's a very, very base layer. But I also think that the Visual Meta reply to thing, which I don't have an interface to yet, I mean, imagine if we had a PDF for each Future of Text. But we also had a reading system where we could open up all of them, and we could do searches across all of them if we wanted to. But it's still in a kind of a document form. So then when we find something useful, we can properly cite it in future work. And when we do that, we start seeing the connections, start seeing the threads. And, we keep the audio and video, share it on YouTube or wherever, hard drives and so on. But at least we have slow, thoughtful means through which we can find and refer to what's been spoken, right? I find it very important in many ways, also for me, because I'm currently sticking my neck out and presenting this stuff that we've all worked on. It's important for me to mention who did what, but why should that be down to my ego that day being correct to remember the right person? That's not good enough. It should also be part of the process to really see where things came up.
Well, it's also actually quite useful. You're thinking about sort of like the Wikipedia example, was that of not having to remember at the front of your mind at the point of creation that there's one person who's really good at correcting apostrophes or something. Because for someone who needs to find that skill, that resource, that's incredibly hard to find. So part of the attribution thing is over and above a nice human sense of recognizing the ensemble is recognizing that some of the parts which on their own seem incredibly workaday may also have massive value elsewhere.
Guys,
so that's the point that our attribution systems are not particularly good at.
I think that's a good point. And also I just realized something that's probably very obvious, and that is there's all kinds of reference management and personal knowledge stuff and all of that. But what if we, for reasons that I should not put on the recording, think of ourselves as building community libraries. But let me just pause for a second.
I get it.
Yeah, so, community libraries.
Hmm. I need to think of it. One other, before the thought passes from mind, just when you were talking about December, is, are there any sort of interesting new aspects or angles coming out of any of the new the new people coming to affection the second edition of the book? And I asked the question from the context, so does that give us any interesting new things that we might try and work towards making more visible or usable in a different way?
I have no idea.
Probably too early.
I editorialize very, very lightly. So I would say absolutely no idea.
Okay. No. I only ask in case that that there have been. So, oh yeah, somebody's raised this really interesting thing I never thought of before. But it doesn't. I'm not asking because I think there should be something. I'm just asking in case there's something really interesting we could do something with.
Imagine if we release editions of the book. We have volumes, one per year. Imagine if we have editions, and what could be called the community edition, which also has all the transcripts for all the open office hours for that year as an appendix. Right? I mean, who cares about the file size, right? Plus many other things. If we think about, because one of the, we talked about earlier, organizing information. I think organizing information is more expensive than creating information, so I agree with the issues. But one thing that is nice is beginning and end of a project. So if we define launch day of the book as being end of project for that year, then we can package it and we can put a lot of resources in there and start a new one. And of course, they refer to each other rather than just ongoing forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that could be part of our library thinking.
Yeah, and an interesting, it's early days, yes, but an interesting thing is to look for any instances where people have been able to take things from the generality of future of text and take it back and actually use it in something, especially say in a larger organization, where someone says, okay, so I've been able to take this idea that's been raised here, or this concept that I've been shown, and I've actually put it into effect. So I've made this thing more accessible, or more inclusive, or more effective. It doesn't really matter what it's more of, but the point is that something that has arisen out of this general conversation has, on a more human scale, moved the needle slightly. I'd rather let it happen than treat it as something that must happen, because if you try and force things, they rarely work. But I think, I suppose I mentioned this in the way of being open to the thought that it might happen, and if it does, it's something that we should put foreground. And one other thing is, I don't know. Oh God, I've forgotten his name now. The chap who's doing the hyper something tool. That I had a whirl at and I got lost on. But has anyone sort of got through book one and started doing any sort of keywording in the loosest sense, or so what were the aspects being raised? Were people talking about typefaces, or were they talking about narrative?
Oh, you're talking about highlighter, probably.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not really doing that either. But I mean, guys, do we want to, just the three of us, obviously I've talked to the rest of the guys, but for the 9th of December, we agree that that's a reasonable time to think of a demo, right?
Yeah.
Something. Okay, so for that, we want to go up and say kind of who we're augmenting, blah, 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 but also the kind of thing we're making. And of course this can change, but do we want it to be a kind of a library? Do we want it to be an interaction, a technology, etc.? And also for the transcription of these things, Adam, you develop on a Mac, right?
Yep.
So do you want to maybe start playing around with saying how good the speech to text is that Apple gives us? Maybe just do one of these videos and see what kind of resources it takes.
Perhaps. I wonder if it's best use of my time. I quite limited time, so I rather do. And tying back to what Mark just said and what you said before, showing the community things, or showing people what can be done, and the ideas are spreading the ideas. I have been playing with the idea instead of doing my contribute, and I said that to when you asked me to contribute, that I rather write code and show than it's hard to write about the future of the text in a way, because in a way you need to show it and people need to experience it to see other futures for of course there are many dimensions to the future of the text, but I mean in how we work with text and in the digital world. So I wanted to do a kind of is it called petting zoo, where you go and pet small
Yeah, yeah.
animals? Yeah. So kind of a petting zoo for text interactions, where you can but these will be crazy, not kittens, but more like out there prototypes, or maybe small interactions, other ways of thinking about text, and other ways of laying out text, other ways of working. So a small petting zoo where you have kind of the timeline I did.
Well, that's why I raised the thing about. I mean, to sort of strip away what was behind my question, I'm thinking just back to the visualizations that Adam did. Is okay. Is there a data set I haven't got to go and make that would allow us to do more with the kind of view that Adam's just made? So, if I look at, can I have all the brown things as opposed to the grey things? What we haven't at the moment got is any resectioning of that. And I just didn't know if there was anyone, because that happened to be their particular bag, had gone and done that with the future of text. And maybe it's something we just need to knuckle down and do, because it allows us to eat our own dog food, and sort of, because the richness, I think, of these different approaches and visualizations is it keeps coming back to, you're entirely limited by the addressable data that you have, which doesn't mean it's not so much in a glorious future sense of every document knowing what it is, but literally just having stuff that is coherent enough that you can actually use it without. So when Adam's making something, it's not wasting time fiddling around with the data. You're just using it to do the really cool visualization stuff. And it's an embuggerance that we are where we are with this, and there aren't these rich sets of data, and we assume there are, but you only got to read a little way into most data analysis stuff, and you find that the dirty secret underneath is very messy. Yeah.
But not everything is kind of as cold as data, as in fact.
Sure.
What I really still want to have is your selection of the best papers that you read so far in the hypertext library. So those 10 documents highlights in the timeline. But then so it's less of data, but opinionated collections. Or
sorry,
stories,
I meant metadata in the very
and I understand that, but there are also so maybe the data we have for from your data set is good enough, and we really need more curation and more the kind of personal the introduction to the hypertext. What really happened with social media entering the picture and so on, the interesting narrations and the interesting collections for that existing data.
So maybe another thing to gently surface as well, because it's being done elsewhere, is the uplift you get from data metadata, call it what you will. Because at the moment there is a sort of, I find the general perception in the wider society is collect stuff, magic phase, wonderful things, and that's just not how it happens. The main thing that nobody wants to do the bit in the middle, because that's done by a notion or somebody else, preferably at no cost or effort to ourselves. And I think
We're superheroes.
Hello,
So,
guys.
it's a superhero. Yeah?
Daddy, so Mummy's the red one, which means Elliot, and you're the demon, and the demon says super camouflaged, and then he comes in real invisible.
You know you're in my meeting now, right? Do you want to say hi?
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Edgar had meeting earlier.
Is that a
Okay, Edgar.
the demon got a superhero visit?
Yeah. By the way, I'm on.
Okay.
I'm just in YouTube here for one of our videos, just trying to find the transcription. They do transcription, but I'm not sure if it's really accessible for automatically. You know, it seems to be mostly open transcript. Let's have a look. Oh yeah, it's all. Can we download it?
I'm constantly amused and slightly embarrassed by the fact that Yuri quite often posts a link to something with a talk I did in previous Future of Text. If you actually read the transcript of it, it reads like my hovercraft is full of eels.
Yeah, but that's how you speak. I think that's quite
Well,
right.
yeah, absolutely. Well, there you go. So there's a limit to what the technology can do.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's just the reason I was talking about getting transcripts is addressable data, like you just said.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and it would be good to find something. I'll do a little bit more research, see what's already developed.
I think it's just a matter of keeping that fact in view that it is not a magic thing that happens by somebody else. So, you know, you can't have one without the other. If we want the magic uplands, we have to keep it in mind that we can't just magic away some of this extra work. And my sort of gut feeling is it's not a difficult thing, because there are some people who like doing some of these things. We just don't give them the agency, or we don't value their work in doing it. We don't give the agency to let them do it, because this, you know, that it's our natural atavistic sense of ownership and territoriality get in the way. So part of this thing is actually also getting a lot more relaxed about just letting other people help you do things.
Yeah, but I mean, that I know you're really, really finicky for details and all of that stuff, but I don't care. I think good enough is good enough for an extent, because we could pay someone to do an hour and a half, and that's going to cost a lot of money.
No, we're talking about different things. I mean, well, so for Adam's visualization, no, good enough isn't good enough, because if only half of it's in focus, it doesn't quite work. So
Well,
there is a minimum level of rigor. It doesn't apply all across the board. I wasn't suggesting that for a moment. So for instance, if we're going to do transcripts or something, you know, there is a sensible degree of pragmatism, but I do actually, I'm coming to see that some of the really interesting stuff we want to do has a sort of hidden baseline or barrier of foundation that it needs, that in use we'll never notice, but it needs to be there.
hang on, I'm going to do a test here with you guys. If you can further explain what you mean. Hang on. Let me just check here.
I have no idea what is.
Well, give him the old
asking
silent
for.
microphone
Okay.
bit.
Yeah, so what were you saying, Adam?
I have no idea what you were talking about here.
Oh, that was
Are you
really
recording something?
I was recording. I was supposed to record us, but I just used Author with the built-in Apple speech stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I say, okay, yeah. So what were you saying, Adam? And it actually transcribed it perfectly, but it didn't get what you were saying for that reason.
But just to reflect back, I mean, I don't know when Adam, when you said you don't want talking about, were you referring to what I sort of said about, you know, need some rigor underneath? I mean, I was just reflecting.
No. I was talking about Frodo's request that we were going to do something. He didn't say what. No, of course it is. I agree with you regarding rigor underneath, and it's very clear to me why that is, and I think there is great value to one, doing that, but two, also providing the tools for people to actually do that. And I think, for example, our office hours, the transcript can be useful to find things, but the important thing is to highlight the good stuff, and no algorithm can do can really understand what the really intelligent comments are in a 2-hour conversation. So we need someone who really we need ourselves to react and write down the timestamps or click on the times and to really highlight those times when someone suggested a very intelligent thing.
Yeah.
So that's the thing of encouraging, those who are consuming this at a later, for whatever reason, either because they can't come or they don't want to come or whatever. But the point is that they're listening to it, to ask them to contribute effectively timestamps where they think comments of note have been made. They may be right, they may be wrong, but it's probably easier actually than just spooling through stuff. Because I take Alan's point that you can, the transcript is useful once you know what you're listening to, but if by that stage you might as well be listening to the person unless it's a different language, and that would help.
We still need the transcript.
Do we?
Yeah, we still, it's still useful to have I mean, there's a reason I record the videos. They are useful. They're actually viewed.
Yeah, but what do we need? I want the timestamps, because my system, I download all the videos and I do timestamps and comments, and that is what the real value. Clicking on a timestamp and immediately jumping to that point and not seeing like 10 pages of a full transcript. That I think the value is in the highlighting and removing all the other stuff.
I don't think I disagree with you, but you need to have the other stuff in order to remove it. I mean, what I would really like to see.
But we have the video in its original form. I have you speaking now. I just want to hear this moment again later on.
Yeah, but that's not so difficult in terms of YouTube timestamp and all of that. However, what I would really like to see, and I think it's exactly what you guys are talking about, is a separate app running natively while we're in a meeting. We all have it. So it's all recording the audio. So at least there's a basic intelligence of who was talking is more likely to be extracted correctly. Secondly, to have a little bit of keyboard shortcuts. It's like spacebar, let's say, means this bit is interesting. It may even go 10 seconds into the past and give you a live transcript of what was said, because it's very easy to just miss the last few seconds. And then based on that kind of annotation, because I think we're speaking the same language here, we can then share our highlights. And if we could share that in a textual form, which makes it very transportable, then we can start building up this kind of personal library of how we see it, while it still refers to whatever is put up on YouTube, right?
Yep, I really agree with what you just said here, because that is exactly what I want to have. And having that mark, not that Mark, but Dr. Mark Anderson, but the mark button is really something that we need for temporal things. I listen to a lot of podcasts and with good thinkers. And so there are so many moments that I want to save and re-listen to, kind of like the quotes in the book.
Let's build it, because even a live meeting where there's one Mac on the table, forget video, just recording audio and sitting there talking to someone, and just reach over and you say, this is something for the future. This kind of stuff has been talked about for decades. No one has managed to build the right interactions. I think in our community, we have the ability to really build and test the interactions. Plus, we have infrastructures for how this data becomes useful and shareable.
Yeah, and an interesting point in that sort of annotation or marking thing is that part of it wants to understand from the thing that probably 9 times out of 10, unless you're doing it at a later date as a reflective thing, that sort of in the flow, marks will almost invariably be just off the mark. What they are is a mark to where the mark might be, and that's an important design facet.
But also, guys, consider that you can use your phone to say, what song is this, right? We should be able to, if we build these systems, there will be a YouTube full version. We will have our own audio. There's no reason we can't find some ML tech, whatever it is, that for our locally recorded bits to find where it is online, right? If we have all of the full data on our systems, it should be able to link these things up, right?
Well, I'm told, for what it's worth, I mean, unless there's an issue over any sort of confidentiality, I'm told Otter AI is very good, but it is cloud-based. But I think it's sort of free, or it's one of these things
But Mark, this is built into every Mac now.
Fine, okay, well, that's...
Most of it, which is, it's really bizarre. Let me just give you the link now that Adam is invisible. So hang on here.
I thought this was one of his whizzy new. I thought this was a whizzy new visualization.
Yeah, and you're disappointed. No, it was just my the
So if
picture I share the share the office with. She's not really happy that I close the door and to her office. So that's why.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to show this. This is stuff that is now available for any developer. And the computer vision stuff is kind of crazy. That is for free, you know, poses and all kinds of stuff. So we could even relatively easily analyze people's behavior in these videos, right? Potentially, who was paying attention, who kind of faded out, who looked like they were speaking to make sure the synchronization. Of course, we're talking quite a bit of money and time to do it, but a lot of the underlying tech now, because of this machine learning stuff, is just there. It's crazy.
Yeah, but I'm a bit skeptical towards machine learning because something it does really well, identifying known things, but it's really bad at identifying things that are really, yeah.
I think. Well, the thing is,
the small things the things between the lines, so to say, and that is where the interesting things are. In many
that's
cases,
our job. That's our job.
Yeah, that's our job. It is.
But also, you know, there's a danger of. I mean, I'm definitely a cynic on some of this, but I'm not in a binary sense. It's not because I think it's bad.
You're non-binary too now, Mark.
No, but I see the limitations of it, which means that it makes. So I'm not just a massive booster of it just because it's there. I see massive use for it appropriately, which is why I want to help. You know, I want to see it used in sort of good ways. There is a sort of tendency, again, in our general daily rush, to want to.
ML. I would define ML today very simply. It's a sense, like touch or hearing. That's basically the useful side of it, because there's a lot of things like recognition of this, that, and so on in objects. Yeah, it's not going to draw any major conclusions, but it does provide saliency for what we should look for. Anyway, I have to go make dinner for the family. But we are moving towards, I think, developing what some people would call personal knowledge management or sense making or record stuff, but with an express design of it being part of a library, not just individual use.
Yeah, but yes, and I think we need to be mindful in doing that. That some parts of that ecosystem, which we would wish to be sort of persistent and everywhere, don't yet exist. So in other words, it'll have to have some soft patches in it because.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, guys, this was lovely. Look forward to Friday. If anything else, something else. There may be an ACM meeting tomorrow. I'm not sure, but all that seems to be steaming ahead as it can.
I really like your visualization, Adam. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's just an embryo, but it was a point for discussion that I really want to. I think it's very useful for us to actually discuss things and to critique them and come up with alternatives and just see them.
Yeah.
One thing I specifically like from that visualization is that you have pages. I don't understand why we want to go back to papyrus scrolls. Yes, we can do different layouts when needed, but an author uses layout to convey. So to use that for getting overview and learning is fantastic. Anyway, gotta go.
Yep.
Wonderful. I will upload this as usual, and then we'll think of a magical way to get the words out of the spoken stuff. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.